Good afternoon. I'm really happy to see you all here, and I'm pleased to introduce my co-presenter, Ambassador Charles Rifkin. I will start and then ask him to speak about his views and his family's history with the Dissent Awards, and then we'll open it up for questions or comments. First of all, I want to note that I'm a proud AFSA member, and I am so grateful that we have this organization. It helps us all in different ways. I commend President Stevenson, the governing board, and the permanent AFSA staff for their dedication and service. Secondly, if there's interest, this could become a continuing conversation. If we don't get to everyone today, let's see if there are ways to reconvene. For example, right here on this non-government property during our non-government lunchtimes. I'll start with the dictionary definition of what we're here to discuss. Dissent, it means to withhold assent or to differ in opinion. And that's clear, but it leaves out an important element I want to flag because I think it's going to come up repeatedly in our conversation. That's the element of timing. As we know, a judge issues a dissent at the time of a ruling. When should we in the State Department do it? During policy formulation or after a policy is finalized? The State Department's 2-FAM definition leads me to conclude that both options are considered valid. The definition refers, to either, quote, open, creative, uncensored dialogue on substantive foreign policy issues within the professional foreign affairs community, and a responsibility to foster an atmosphere supportive of such dialogue, including the opportunity to offer alternative and dissenting opinions without fear of penalty, and the formal dissent channel for when, quote, views cannot be communicated in a full and timely manner through regular operating channels or procedures. So, one of those approaches is more famous right now, as Barbara mentions. But as the chair of AFSA's committee, which manages the Dissent Awards, we have seen both types nominated for recognition. That first formulation is or should be somewhat routine. For example, we all argue over policy within our office or in larger meetings. We move words around during clearance requests. We refuse to clear documents that cross a line. We ask for a moment with our supervisor to make the case more forcefully. We find allies, we build new policy positions based on arguments and proof. And there are other methods which are used in Washington, and nothing I endorse or will discuss here. The second formulation, an internal dissent channel message after a policy is enacted, is a very important tool at our disposal and one that Ambassador Rifkin will speak more to. Writing or signing such a message is an act that feels exposed, risky, and sometimes futile after a policy exists. But on a personal level, after several decades of service, I have a strong belief in the rightness of using this internal channel if other options are unavailable. I believe this even when, and especially when, sometimes you believe there is no chance it will change policy. It actually might change policy. It also might be the basis for the next policymaker's decision. Or, at the least, it's going to show others that we gave our considered opinion and didn't succumb to groupthink, even when the circumstances were really daunting. So finally, something else to consider. The department has the right not to take the dissenter's advice. And that the rules that we want for our own protected dissent are the same rules protecting those we disagree with, people who criticize policies we like. There was a clerk who refused to issue same-sex marriage licenses, although the law had changed. And I think there was a quite proper firestorm that once you are in a position to carry out policy, if that policy changes, you either carry it out or you leave your position. And I think at the heart of it, at the end of a dissent process, that might be a decision we would all have to face. I'm really proud of my colleagues, our service to our country and our Constitution. And to me, expressing constructive ways to do what is right for our country and for our Constitution is an honorable and a sacred responsibility. Ambassador Rifkin.
Well, Annie, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my, as the ambassador said, I served 8 years during the Obama administration, first 4.5 actually in Paris, and then the last 3 is EB. So I've been given such a gift, the rare opportunity to both help create policy and resonate policy as an ambassador. And before that, and hopefully after that, I have been in business. I'm currently unemployed, happily so. First time I've been in the neighborhood in 3 weeks since I left the government. But it's great to see familiar faces, especially from the Bureau who are here. Really quickly to flesh out a little bit of what the ambassador was saying on the origins of the award. My father was Kennedy's ambassador to Luxembourg, and but because Hubert Humphrey was my godfather, when Kennedy died, he was able to convince Johnson that my dad wasn't a Kennedy man after all and was really a Johnson guy. And so they did the unusual thing of taking a political appointee at the time and naming him ambassador in Dakar. So I lived, when I was 6 months old, I lived in Embassy Luxembourg. And then at around 3 or so, 4 actually, I moved to Embassy Dakar. And then sadly, my father died of a heart attack while serving at post. So it was about a week before my 5th birthday, and I never knew him. And but I did know about what people told me and what he wrote and his letters and his memos, and I've done a lot of research. And he hated yes men. He couldn't stand the idea that people would say, "Yes, Mr. Ambassador, of course, Mr. Ambassador, anything you say, Mr. Ambassador." He wanted their actual opinions, and he was frustrated that some people were reticent to give those opinions. And so with Humphrey's help, they had this idea, well, what if we actually reward people at the State Department for giving their frank and honest opinion, and created an award honoring intellectual courage and constructive dissent. And what was interesting about that, well, for me, by the way, this award's been given since 1968, and I was born in 62, so ever since I was 6 years old, I had a chance to see the brave men and women of our foreign service making a huge difference in the world. And and I've said as I travel around the world, these are people yourselves, people who are working at a discount to what the market would pay you, sometimes at the risk of your own lives, selflessly patriotic, contributors to our society, and most of the time in anonymity. And I came to post with such an appreciation, I think, perhaps slightly rare for a political ambassador. But nonetheless, as former AFSA president Tom Boyatt, and also Boyatt won the Rivkin Award, but as former AFSA president Boyatt said that creation of the award in '68 was a good start, but to be effective within bureaucracies, dissent has to be institutionalized. So actually 3 years after the award was created, and shortly after it was created, Harriman and Herter joined because Rivkin's mid-level, and so the senior and junior officer awards came. But in '71, as the ambassador was saying, the department established the formal dissent channel to ensure that senior officials learn of and consider dissenting from views in formulating policy. And the administration, this was in '71, from the administration of President Nixon, who promised to include dissenters in policy discussions through Obama, a core value of the Foreign Service has always been that when the national interest is threatened, U.S. diplomats not only have an opportunity, but a duty to point out unsound policies and propose constructive alternatives. In fact, I remember when I was as EB, I was in Embassy Seoul, I think it was, and I saw this plaque on the wall. I didn't know these things existed, but it was a State Department core value plaque. I haven't seen them very many places, but I saw it there. And they said the core values of the State Department are loyalty, character, accountability, community, and service. And under service, there are the words, if you guys have seen this, excellence in the formulation of policy and program management with room for creative dissent as a core value of a Foreign Service officer. What I found interesting about that, and the reason I photographed it and memorized it, is that the original Rivkin Award was for creative dissent, and it evolved into constructive dissent. And so I've never really understood, maybe we took it from there, or maybe they took it from us, but either way, it's core to what everybody does, what you guys do every day. In fact, in 1973, September 14th, I was 11 years old, and I stood as my mother was talking to Henry Kissinger, because Kissinger gave the award that year. And I didn't understand this too well, but I learned afterwards that Kissinger said, tell me please how this award started, and my mother gave him the history, and then Kissinger is about to go on stage to present the award in '73, and he goes, I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying that I am but to give an award to somebody who disagrees with me? My mother said, yes, sir, you are. And so, but he did. And what's interesting is that a high percentage of winners of these awards, certainly the Rivkin Award, have gone on to serve as ambassadors, which shows you that it works. In addition to Ambassador Boyott, who is extraordinary, as you guys all know, past Rivkin Award winners are Anthony Quainton, Tex Harris, Ryan Crocker, Joe Wilson, and Jeff Pyatt currently. I've noticed as I travel around that people say, when I was EB, people would say, Ambassador Rivkin, great to meet you. In fact, I'm a proud winner of the award. And I would look at their EER, not their EERs, their bios on the state page, and they would proudly mention Dissent Award winner. That speaks to an extraordinary culture, and quite frankly, unique in the entire interagency, and something I think everybody should be proud of. Winners have dissented on issues like Vietnam, the Iran hostage crisis, Lebanon, Iraq. And one quick story to tell you. You guys probably know Jim Zumwalt over, he's ambassador in Dakar. And I visited him actually and had a chance to walk the same walk my father did when I was EB. It was an amazing journey. But Zumwalt was DCM in Tokyo when John Roos was the ambassador in the first term of Obama, 2009. And what happened, he proposed a guy named Joel Ehrenreich for the Rivkin Award. And the reason why is that every single year, just to give you an example of the Rivkin Award, the ambassador, since World War II, would be presented with a recommendation as to whether or not he or she should visit Hiroshima on the anniversary of the bomb. And every year it was rejected. And it was rejected with idea, America does not apologize, America does not say it's sorry, America will never bow down. But no one was asking the ambassadors to speak. They were asking them to show respect and be present. And interestingly, ambassadors throughout the world, in France, I noticed for sure, for D-Day, for every other war memorial, our ambassadors are present and honoring the dead, but not in Hiroshima. And so this young mid-level foreign service officer says, I think it's time we change that. And he asked the ambassador to do so, and this is before Roos, the Bush second-term ambassador. And the ambassador says, well, I don't think it's a good idea, but let me take it to the country team. So the entire country team in Tokyo is pretty big, and every single one agreed with the ambassador, no, there's no way we're going to apologize, we're not going to do this. But Joel still disagreed, and he left, cycled out of Tokyo, and he kept on lobbying in calls, please go this year, this is something you should do, this is wrong, policy needs to change. And so when Roos ended up as ambassador in 2009, and he got that on his desk, he said, this sounds like a good idea, ran it by Obama, was aware of the history of dissent that Joel had done, and Obama says, I support you, go. And Roos went and was the first ambassador. Caroline Kennedy was more visibly so, but Roos was the first one to go, and it was largely based on this analysis from Joel. And what's interesting is that Roos tells me that when Fukushima happened, and he traveled all throughout Japan, he was looking, he met people and they would say, oh, thank you, Ambassador Roos-san, thank you so much for your what you do. And he goes, oh, you're welcome. And they go, no. He thought he was talking about Fukushima and how he was helping the Japanese deal with that tragedy. And they go, no, we're not talking about Fukushima. We're talking about you coming to Hiroshima and showing us honor and showing us respect. And after he did that, every other country followed. And now almost every other major country is there at Hiroshima every year, silently showing their respect for the war. And I think it's an interesting example of, sometimes it seems obvious now, right? Of course we should do that. But it wasn't, not in the country team. And it's an example when there are weightier issues of how sometimes when we do things over and over again, it doesn't necessarily mean they're right. And it's important to have the critical thinking on the ground. If you have been in rooms with President Obama, as I have, you'll know that one thing I found interesting about state is, and I try to run EB this way, is if you're going to be in a meeting with me, you should speak. I don't like a culture where people are just sitting there taking notes or not allowed to speak. And people that, depending on their title, often the more junior officers have the most interesting ideas. And so I would always, surround myself with people like that. But President Obama did the same. If you're in a room with him, he's going to call on you if you don't open your mouth. And he's going to say, do you agree with this? And if you don't speak your mind, he'll know. And what I found interesting about his leadership style was that I was a CEO before going into the Foreign Service or before becoming ambassador, and no one individual can be smarter than a room. And if you don't have to agree with But if you listen to different perspectives, you will make better decisions in business and you make better decisions in government. In one of his last speeches, President Kennedy wrote, he wrote, "Men who create power make an indispensable contribution to the nation's greatness. But the men who question power make a contribution just as indispensable, for they determine whether we use power or power uses us." You know, and many have said that dissent is the highest form of patriotism for that reason. And as the ambassador mentioned, I think it was even yesterday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Cardin sent a letter to Secretary Tillerson signed by Senators Menendez, Shaheen, Coons, Murphy, Kaine, Markey, Merkley, and Booker, all stressing the importance of maintaining a strong and protected dissent channel at the U.S. State Department. I found a couple other quotes interesting. Edward Murrow warned Senator McCarthy. He said, "We must never confuse dissent with disloyalty." And Learned Hand, one of the smartest men I've ever certainly read about, once observed, "A community where orthodoxy chokes freedom of dissent is a community in the process of dissolution." Well, at the end of the day, one doesn't have to agree with the analysis. If you're a leader or CEO or president or secretary of state, you don't have to agree with the analysis and recommendations of the Foreign Service officers who are, even questioning the president himself, in order to recognize the importance of protecting their right to constructively dissent when their judgment and their conscience dictate to do so. And our nation has always been stronger when we not only tolerate, but honor constructive dissent on important and highly complex policies. So in these turbulent times, we have to remind ourselves that thoughtful dissent is not disloyalty. It's our patriotic duty. And that's why I'm so proud that not only was the award established in '68 and the channel remains as strong as it does, but that it continues. And I'm also excited now that I'm no longer in the government, to be coming back here every year to present the award and hopefully to present it to people that are friends of mine. I'm slightly disappointed that no one dissented against me in Paris or in EB, so I didn't have to recuse myself. But still, I think, and there's some EB people in the room that can attest to this, that I think the people that worked with me and for me understand how much I value that. And I hope that that remains the norm of this extraordinary institution of the State Department.
Well, with that, I think the point is to let you all give us some either comments or some questions that we can discuss as a group. This is your event.
Well,
so the question is about the new environment, and in particular about openness and social media. The fact that the Dissent channel was originated at a time which was more stovepiped, where messages were delivered more by cable than other mechanisms, but that we're being encouraged to be to publicly engage, and that we have sort of ways of making some of these dissent messages more public that didn't used to exist. Go ahead.
Well, no, just from my perspective, and I think it's a fantastic and very topical question, but as a non-government employee, and please correct me if you disagree, I don't think it's healthy or productive to have this dissent playing out in public. I don't think that was the intent. If I were a CEO and people disagree with me and I valued that dissent and made my policy or my decision based on their comments, I wouldn't really appreciate them going into the social media and saying, I disagreed with CEO so-and-so's views. I know it's a strange analogy, but when Obama, and I think I said I wasn't going to mention this, but when President Obama was confronted with the leaked dissent on Syria, there were some 60-odd, 62, 63 Foreign Service officers who disagreed with his policy. And my recollection is that he said, that thank you, the dissent is important. Secretary Kerry will meet with you to hear your thoughts, and we will take them into consideration. But he also expressed his displeasure that this was playing out in the public. And so I guess the key would be how to have the discipline to dissent and to help constructively improve foreign policy without the political dynamics. And maybe, as you're saying, in today's world, it's harder and harder to do that. But I think if we don't do that, then the dissent channel loses its impact, in my mind.
You know, I agree, and I think you've captured it very well, because it's something, you know, as a current practitioner, I might grapple with a little bit. But in essence, the internal nature of a policy discussion is important, and sometimes in the act of making a public statement about your views, I think we sort of, I refer to it as making yourself the hero of your Facebook page. You know, you can exaggerate a bit, or you can be a little less able to seek common ground. That's one problem. Another really is that it becomes harder for the other side to meet you partway if they feel that they've been called out publicly. There are lots of ways in which I think that the protected nature of the dissent channel has a lot to do with it being an internal mechanism. And if you choose to go outside of it, you may or may not feel as protected, because it's not designed to protect every piece of your speech outside, if that makes sense. So the social media guidelines that AFSA is working on, you know, promulgating, I deeply understand that people are finding themselves uncomfortably restrained in an environment that is, you know, pretty free for all out there. But some lines have got to be drawn, and they're new lines. So maybe they are very conservative lines to start with, saying that we really shouldn't be out there airing our personal views about policy matters. I'm pretty sure over time there'll be nuances to that. But everyone really should be careful about the difference between protected dissent in the definition that, you know, we understand to be the State Department regs, and a policy debate that's playing out in public. Now, having said that, you know, overall we are less stovepiped. Overall we talk to each other more. And so there's something that's a tiny bit antique about a channel message back in the days where, you know, we used to communicate with Washington once a day in our, I'm showing my age, but anyway. So I am pretty sure it needs a little updating somewhere along the line.
You know, to slightly change the topic but related, without naming names or specific instances, because in EB I had a couple thousand econ officers around the world. I visited 43 posts and traveled around 400,000 miles and met a lot of Foreign Service officers. And I have people a lot of people that I consider my friend to this day. I had about a half dozen to a dozen of them emailing me and asking for a private conversation when a recent topic came out about whether they should dissent. And they were concerned. They were concerned because they took an oath to the U.S. Constitution. They didn't take an oath to a president or a king or anyone else, but to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And yet they were young, and they didn't know if they'd be protected, and they didn't know what this means by public to their careers. And every single one of them did it anyways. And I was very proud to see that you know, you devote your life, you love this institution, but you love it so much that you want to express your concerns. And you know, and I don't think any of them expected it to be public, and certainly they don't expect their names to be public. But I certainly love the fact that these younger officers still see that value. I spoke to as many A100 classes as I could when I was assistant secretary, and I mentioned the Dissent Awards, and so many came up to me afterwards and said, that's why we joined the State Department. Because, you know, if you can't have an opinion that's your own, then why do they want my brain? Why do they even want me? So I feel that it really is part of the DNA, but it does risk if it becomes, where's the line? When must something be public? Who, you know, is every single dissent now going to be a public debate and policy? That I'm hoping that they will realize that's not constructive, and the words are constructive and intellectual courage and constructive dissent in the award.
Thank you. Another question or comment? Okay, the question is about mechanics, the ways in which someone at one post would be able to communicate with others on an issue that crosses or has more than applicability in more than one post. and also whether USAID officers or those without access to OpenNet are able to use the channel. You know, on that second, more technical question, I might ask, I don't know, Barbara, if there's a way for AFSA to sort of look into that, or if,
Find each other?
sorry?
Which part, Amy? I was
Oh, no, just whether the mechanics of, just thinking about a follow-up, because I don't think I can give you a reliable answer right now about that. Um,
when you read what the dissent message says, I mean,
Yeah.
again, your hint, if that's your question, that the way we communicate is different. It really is the idea that what you can see behind it is the idea that there's a policy about the country you serve in, and you see that there's a problem with it, like Hiroshima, and then you push it up. But it doesn't say it must be restricted to that, but when you read all the way through to FAM, you see that it's written with that in mind. But of course, this was a global policy, and we now live in this interconnected
Yeah.
world, so it took the dissent channel into new space that I think was a real challenge for the rhetoric.
Well, okay, so did that get picked up?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay. On the mechanics issue, I'm afraid I'm not able to answer your question right here about the OpenNet usage. I have to imagine, check the FAM, there's probably a provision or somebody to ask through there. And AID officers are covered as being part of the process that would be protected. On the other issue, though, let me take this into maybe less of a mechanical question about whether you talk to other posts by email, et cetera. I think this is a really important point. Are you going to only dissent about the things that you know best, or that you know the whole policy about? I mean, going to a Hiroshima event is something that a single person can kind of know all about. But there were group dissents in the past, one on Bosnia, and one of the awardees pointed out that the important thing to him was that it was Washington based, but there were people from different bureaus involved, like the Refugee Bureau and the EUR Bureau and others, and that no single officer could really grapple with what was wrong. They all could tell that something was not working in their view, but that it took a multifaceted approach where different perspectives, and in some cases perhaps the viewpoints of different embassies, would put the picture together. And when a policy is deeply wrong, what's really interesting is, some of us have thought about this, like, what would I do if I were asked to do X or Y or Z? Well, the chances are you would never be asked to do the bad thing, go, build that prison or whatever. You'd be asked to go buy the land. Or, you over there would be asked to go figure out how many people can sleep in this much. Like, everything we do is somewhat broken down into component parts. And what's so interesting as I looked at the dissent issue is, how do you dissent effectively when you only really see your part? It's fascinating, and probably where I think this needs to go in the future is, how do people looking at a wider policy problem talk to each other and compare notes and figure out what it is that would be the constructive alternative solution to the problem that they're seeing. And in this day and age, it's probably going to be email, or it's kind of what someone I spoke to about this described as like a virtual community of interest, that if you see a policy problem, how do you communicate with other people who might be seeing it too? And how do you put your perspective together? Because we're a very big institution now. Everything is pretty broken down into pieces. So I don't know if that partly answered some of your questions. Would you post something to your Facebook that only your friends could see? I'm going to say, as a non-lawyer, I'm going to give you...
Our lawyer here too.
Sharon?
Right.
All right. I will give you the non-lawyer version of that, which is, that doesn't strike me as a good idea at all, and that Facebook is not as private as, in any way, shape, or form as people would like to think. So I personally would think that would be a bad way of proceeding. Is there a lawyer in the house?
I can stand up and just.
No.
No.
Nope, it's okay. Can you?
No, but you won't be picked up otherwise, if you want to use.
Sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to
speak
step
into
in
the
here.
Rikers Confined Deputy General Counsel.
Yes, I am the Deputy General Counsel here at AFSA. We've received a lot of questions of that nature, and unfortunately, the rules that we have in play, that the department has, the FAM has a lot of holes in it, and we have been trying to get guidance from them to fill those gaps. And so your question about posting something on a group, there's a lot of nuances. It's a closed group. Is it all just foreign service officers? Is there non-USG individuals that can see the post? Because that will bring in other questions. Is it something that has to be approved through public affairs? There's not a clear answer to your question, and we're working to get something a bit more precise on that. Well, not about your official email, but there's a difference between using perhaps a personal email account versus a social media platform where it can be accessed by other individuals. It's the idea of social media, Twitter, Facebook, stuff of that nature versus your personal email account perhaps. That's,
Yeah, no, did that make enough sense? Because we've got other people want to ask questions.
and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards.
Just before you call on the next one, I just wanted to respond with another example. Some time ago, a woman who worked at USAID won the Rivkin Award because she was in Africa, and she was deeply concerned about a horrible, brutal procedure done to women by certain countries in Africa that America completely disagreed with. And so the Secretary of State ordered more people in the field to do reparative surgery on these women. And the head of AFRICOM said, okay, we have a tight time frame, let's get them out there. And we, in our infinite wisdom, apparently sent people that were just not qualified to help these women. And they were doing brutal repair surgeries that made it even worse. And the woman on the ground said, if you actually want to help these nations, don't be worse than the nations themselves. And she descended to her boss, and he shut her down, and her boss's boss shut her down. And eventually there's a meeting of all of the region in Africa, and she raised her hand. And even though she had been told not to say this, she made it the head of AFRICOM aware of that. And he said, well, hasn't anybody told me this? And they changed their policies immediately, and it impacted much more than one country. It impacted what was happening throughout the entire region based on the fact that she had great knowledge of that one country. And so I'm not speaking to AFSA or Dissent, but I'm speaking to, if you're going to be honored with one of these awards, it's usually because your individual expertise on the ground makes a difference. Your opinion about what's happening someplace else that you aren't necessarily as knowledgeable about as people that are in that country is less impactful. But policy can change when they use one example that happens to be that way in the other places. Having said that, I agree with you. We're in a very different world now, and so wouldn't it be more impactful to actually have like-minded people in various countries facing the same issue making the case? And how you get there is not my not my bailiwick, but I hear you.
All right, we had a question back there. The question is about a dissent message that has the aspect of being more of a petition against a policy perhaps versus having policy alternatives within the message itself, which I think I would say the last message did have alternatives in it. And I would agree with the idea that constructive dissent is exactly what it sounds like, that you really should have some kind of other way of doing something that's in the U.S. government's interest. And generally speaking, this may not be that people think that the policy itself, the highest level definition of the policy, such as national security, is the wrong policy. They think it's the wrong way to get there. So often there is a way of formulating an alternative that should be very loyal to the sort of broadest iteration of the policy that's at hand.
The recent news of the immigration policy that received widespread dissent here at the State Department, in my short experience compared to everybody in this room, is slightly unusual, because normally if you're dissenting against something you've tried to already express your dissent, and when that's not being heard, you then use the channel to make sure it's heard at the highest level. But when something is just introduced, I don't know what your options are except to express your public dissent. But I don't know. I'm not aware of very many dissents that have come in just when a policy has been launched and people are caught by surprise. I haven't seen that personally. Maybe you guys have.
No,
And by the way, the concept of the way that Annie described today was a round table, and we have a slightly strange shaped table here in the room. But there should be a discussion, and so I hope that, if you don't mind me saying so, Annie, I hope that people will feel free to respond to the questions that are being asked yourselves, because that's the whole point of, I think, these types of gatherings.
to be on tape.
Oh, unless you don't want to be on tape.
Unless you don't want to be on tape. No, there was somebody else who had raised their hand, or, okay. There you go. Do you want to reformulate?
No, please.
So the question is about the environment now and being a manager of people who may be experiencing a lot of anxiety about the policies that are unfolding, and how ways to ask people to focus their energy in a constructive way at this point.
I'm sure there is greater expertise in the room to answer this than I have, but I can just say from my vantage point as a former CEO and hopefully future CEO, and as in my leadership positions at state, the most complicated thing that you face as a manager is when emotion enters a debate, and I think it's important that people need to try their best to take it out of the debate. And if you want to come in and do that, you can vent all you want, but if you want to have a constructive conversation, then put politics aside, put your emotions aside, and actually talk about facts and talk about what can be done constructively. And if they can't be done, then you should just, not consider that dissent. You should consider that griping. By the way, we throw out so many awards every year, the Rifkin Award, where people are just griping. My supervisor's a jerk, and I can't believe it. He won't let me have this, so I'm dissenting against him. I mean, that kind of misses the boat. But in the State Department, you can't ignore, like every other business, that emotions do play a role. And so how you handle that as a manager is really important to bureau morale and keeping your team intact. And it's not something that I've seen a lot of training for here in the department. But everybody handles those things differently. I don't know. Do you have a different perspective on that?
Well, I'm a manager, I'm an office director, facing some of this, I think, for the moment, in an area of the world in Western Hemisphere that has had a few bumps, but also has been not as controversial as some. I have to tell you, in total blunt honesty, it's a day-by-day feeling. I don't know. I mean, what we all faced the first week of the administration was kind of felt like a barrage of brand new initiatives, and our bureaucracy moves at the pace it moves at. And we had to make some quick decisions and reactions. Things seem to be at a different pace, which allows us to use a few more of our normal tools of assessing policy initiatives. And if you are allowed the time to sort of think and breathe, we're smart. And I think we're going to come up with ways to reflect the political, the new political terrain we're in. There was an election, that happened. And so we're reflecting the terrain, but we're going to reflect it intelligently, and we're going to give great options, and we're going to occasionally reflect and redirect. And I think there are still open to us a lot of ways to use our professional expertise and the trust that we'll have to, we're going to have to develop and earn with the people who are in charge to say, we get it, and we have these following thoughts for you about the policy you're interested in enacting, and how do we work together to make it work for the U.S. government?
Something funny, I was put in place as a political appointee by a Democratic president. One could assume that I'm a Democrat, but never in my 8 years of working for the State Department did I ever have a single policy conversation that involved partisanship. Never once did I ask anybody working for me what their party was, and it didn't matter to me, and it would be inappropriate for me to do so. But the thing that I'm the most encouraged by now that I've left the building is the people that I've met along the way, the people that are in this room, who understand, I think, for the large part, that when the world doesn't fully understand American policy, is when you guys earn your keep, you know, and the stronger that we deliver nuanced messages, the stronger our country is. And I just feel so grateful that no matter who's president, I'm not saying good or bad, this administration, but no matter who's president, the role of the Foreign Service becomes so much more important when we send inadvertently even mixed signals. So
I agree. And sorry, one last point, that the keeping emotions out of it is important. Compiling the data that we get, you know, every day that goes by, we know more. And in our case, honestly, we say, you know, we get it that there's this tone that was taken, for example, on Mexico. That is understandable. We're going to report back to you that something else that we were trying to do in Latin America has been affected by that. Just letting you know, and let the people making these decisions understand the implications of what has happened day by day, and draw conclusions that that help everybody, you know. And I guess with your morale, with your office, letting everybody know that we tell the truth to each other and we tell the truth upwards. Thank you. And I am considerably older and have been through quite a few of these transitions. And for example, there have been instances where relations were unbelievably rocky, you know, all the way through an administration. I'm really not going to kid you on that. So although some elements are unusual, some elements are not. But I completely get with you that the point is that a manager has to be as upfront as possible about what they're seeing and what their experience tells them. So, question?
I hope that at least a transcription of what you said could be shared with others, because everybody that has worked with you and knows you knows that you are not afraid of speaking the truth, and it certainly has helped your career, I think, and it's great that you served on the committees. But your point is interesting, that you said about the dip in nominations. Something I've never really talked about publicly, but I have seen these graphics of how some administrations are more welcome to dissent, and as a result, there are more dissenting, voices. And there is always somebody. We've never, very few times since 1968 have we, maybe even once, have we not given an award. But it is troubling to me when I see those dips. So I hope that's not, what we'll see in our future.
First of all, it's completely awesome that one of AFSA's lawyers is here, not to give you the answer, but to tell you AFSA's lawyers are awesome. And that is one of the things that is out there is, you have protected rights, and they are the ones who are going to be your first phone call if you ever, you ever feel like you need one. I am just, so appreciative over the years of the help and advice that they have given. And secondly, I think, Sue really hit it, which is the attitude of leadership. And maybe, some of us who are more senior and AFSA, we say it and we mean it, and we have to keep saying it, that we have to hear out of the most senior leadership of this department as they change faces, they should say the same thing over and over again, which is that they value dissent. But the dissenter has to play a little bit by the rules as well. It's not all created equal. That Dissent Channel, as I say, is sort of the most formal version of it, but there are all these other ways of doing it. But there also is a moment where you make your best argument and you don't win. So that becomes a question of maybe you were actually not correct, or maybe you didn't win and you should take it higher and more formal. But sort of doing the same type of dissent over and over again probably isn't as constructive. Does that make sense?
Can I just add, I agree with Annie, but could I, just to flesh out what you said a little bit more, clearly any organization, government or private, is healthier when the culture respects intelligent opinions. And administrations change in both business and in government, and sometimes that respect isn't as evident. But you're all diplomats, and diplomats know how to disagree without being unnecessarily disagreeable. If you disagree with a policy and you find that there is complete closed ears to it and no one wants to even hear your thoughts, then the Dissent Channel is open to you. So can you give me an example of the silently suffering dissenter, just generically? Help me understand how this isn't working for them, because it should work for them. They should, if they really feel strongly about something and they really have articulated it in a compelling way and they're not being listened to and they still feel the need, that should be what the dissent channel is about.
Sure, you can answer, and then Barbara wants
Mhm.
to make a point.
That dissent is actually, one of the ways AFSA defends it is in the core precepts for promotion. And so we always negotiate the language that goes in to your annual, the precepts for your annual evaluation report. And part of what leadership is openness to dissent and differing views. And there's really beautiful language for entry-level, mid-level, and senior level about your obligations to engaging in constructive dissent yourself, and then when you become a senior officer, to encourage and expect personnel to express opinions and to use dissent channel, and to accord importance to well-founded constructive dissent. So I think that the dissent awards are a complement to what is built into an annual evaluation cycle that says we value dissent, and it's an important part of what leadership means.
Thank you. Do you want to? Not very much. The idea is that an award to the managers who encourage and accept dissent would send a positive signal. Thank you. You have a question, and I don't know what the time is.
So, looks like we're-
I just wanted to supplement what Barbara just said. In addition to the precepts that AFSA negotiates with management and which are part of every level of EER, there are leadership and management principles which the department has endorsed and which AFSA, under Barbara's presidency, has championed, and which specifically speak to the importance of encouraging dissenting views among one's team. And there are active initiatives both within AFSA as well as the department through the iLead initiative to encourage the broadest possible implementation of those principles. And we continue to work on that regularly. Thank you.
I think we are over our time. Ambassador, do you want to
Sorry, I was
say some final
I
words?
was
Negotiating.
typing someone who's very familiar with my dissent, my wife, who's outside in the hallway wondering about our lunch. No, I just want to thank you for giving me a chance to be here. I didn't expect to be in the neighborhood anytime soon, but it's a topic that matters a lot to me, and it's something that I think makes us stronger, makes the State Department stronger as an institution. And it's these kinds of conversations that do lead to policy change, and it's important that Barbara hears all of them. And there were some great ideas that were mentioned today. I'm just hopeful that in your continued careers, you see the fact that it's a continuum. And if the culture of the building changes to the point where people are scared of expressing their opinion, then you have really under-maximized your potential. Because when I worked at the State Department, I worked with the smartest people I've ever met in my lives. And smart people have a hard time just saying, yes, sir, whatever you say, sir, that makes sense, without feeling differently inside. So the more you speak, the more you constructively help our foreign policy, the better our nation. And I'm hopeful that that's what will continue. But the fact that you're here today probably means that you're of like mind. But thank you, Annie, for letting me participate. I appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. Thanks, Barbara. This is your idea, and when we talked about it, the first person I thought of was you, Ambassador Rifkin. So thank you, everybody, for coming, and we can talk after. Thank you.